The purpose of this podcast is to educate and inform. It is no substitute for professional care by your doctor or your qualified healthcare professional. Never disregard or delay professional medical advice because of something you've heard on this podcast or in any linked material. Guests who speak on this podcast express their own opinions, experience, and conclusions. Dr. Shirley neither endorses nor opposes any particular opinion discussed on this podcast. The views expressed on this podcast have no relation to those of any academic, hospital, practice, institution, or other entity with which Dr. Shirley may be affiliated.
Welcome to Forever Fab, the podcast on fashion, the art of living, and all things beauty. This podcast is curated by Dr. Shirley Madere, MD, as the definitive source of holistic wellness through beauty.
Welcome to Forever Fab, the podcast dedicated to fashion, the art of living, and all things beauty. I'm your host, Dr. Shirley Madere, your purveyor of this definitive source of living a beautiful life. I'm going to start with a little bit of inspiration today. I'm going to read to you my horoscope, and I'm in Aries. And this, you may think, may not apply to you, but I think it applies to everyone. And the reason why I'm starting with this today is because I've really been nervous about this podcast. What could I possibly say? I'm trained to listen as a physician, and I'm trained to really defer to others. But this is a podcast, so I really have to talk. So I'm going to start with this Aries astrology reading, and it's from The Numinous, which is where I get my weekly horoscope readings, and you can go to thenuminous.com and find yours. But again, I'm Aries, so this applies to you and everyone who's Aries rising. But again, I think it applies to a lot of people who may or may not be Aries or have Aries rising. So here we go. A golden star. A star is always above. It's something to look up to. Gold is symbolic of many qualities, among them illumination, love, virtue, wisdom, magic, and prosperity. It's time for you to lift up your mind and set your sights higher. There is no limit to your sense of love, wisdom, and prosperity. This week can teach you that. Open yourself up to new ways of thinking, or if that's too extreme, refine your current thought process. There's room to grow. I mean, that was so perfect for this podcast and for this journey that I'm taking with you in this podcast that I thought I'd share it with you. That said, today's podcast is called The Science of Beauty, Why Beauty Matters. Is beauty truly in the eye of the beholder as we are taught to believe? Is it as subjective as everyone tells us it is? Are there universal standards for beauty? Today's podcast explores the science and psychology of beauty and why we may need beauty not only to survive, but to thrive. What is beauty exactly? Who defines it? Is it a luxury? A necessity? I think it may be both. Is there a universal standard of beauty in one culture versus another, or is it just global? In today's episode, I'm going to attempt to present clarity on these questions, and hopefully you'll take the journey with me from the superficial to the deep and back to the superficial again. And that's beauty, inside and out. So every once in a while when I attend a dinner party and people ask, "Oh, what do you do?" Obviously I answer, I'm a plastic surgeon, and it's really fascinating the different responses that I get. Sometimes it's pure fascination, other times it's intrigue and interest, other times it's feigned intrigue and interest, and other times there's a mild revulsion there, as if, plastic surgery, who would ever, so superficial. Well, this podcast is dedicated to all of those so superficial people, because beauty is not superficial, and if it is superficial, that's only what you see, because it goes significantly deeper than that. Beauty may be visual and apparent superficially, but that doesn't make it superficial. I'm going to repeat that. Beauty may be apparent superficially and very surface, but that doesn't mean that beauty is superficial. In fact, beauty is deeply engraved with what it means to be human and mentally healthy. And I got that quote from Vice Online. I mean, hello, Vice Online. So they're up on it too. So if beauty is about being human, can it unite us across languages and cultures? Are there universal standards of beauty? Surprisingly, the answer is no, but yes. So it's simple, but also complex. Across the world, people may identify various individual characteristics as beautiful or attractive. But there are, in fact, there are 4 traits that are universally agreed upon that we all seem to believe, create, or contribute to who or what is beautiful. And these traits serve as a signal of good genes and suitability as a suitor or partner. So it may not be conscious, but it's definitely there. It may be a wavelength that rides underneath what you think is rational thought, and it may not make sense, but these traits are definitely at play. So these facial traits include symmetry. The eyes like to see what appears to be even and uniform. The second trait is high feminine characteristics. And what are those? Typically, they're large eyes, full lips, round cheeks, and high eyebrows. The makeup artist might know what I'm talking about. The third trait is maturity of age. And generally speaking, that's youthfulness. So generally, we like to see what is youthful, not necessarily because it's related to an age or a number, but because sometimes that youthfulness denotes vivaciousness, vitality, and energy. And the fourth trait, believe it or not, is averageness. So typically you think, well, if she looks average or he looks average, that isn't necessarily beautiful, but the facial trait that the brain recognizes as beautiful has a lot to do with being average. So the brain likes what's familiar and what's typical. The ancient Greeks also had their say in what they thought would be considered beautiful, and they identified it as the golden ratio, where that's one of the characteristics that they thought anything in nature or in life was beautiful had to have this golden ratio. Now, that golden ratio is actually a ratio between the whole and one of its parts being equal to the ratio between 2 of its parts. And that exists in nature, in art, in landscapes, and in other objects of beauty. Mathematically, for those nerds out there, including myself, mathematically, that is 121.61803398875. That even sounds like a little rhythm. This golden ratio is in Egypt's pyramids. It's in the shape of DNA. It's in the works of Salvador Dali. It's in the music of Bela Bartok. It's in the veins in leaves. It's in the leaves and branches along a flower's stem. So again, it may not be conscious, it may not be obvious, but it's superficial because we can see it. But it's still complex and deep. One definition of beauty is visual input that gives pleasure to the mind. I mean, that could be anything. That definition is so broad, it's so expansive. It could be a landscape. Again, it could be Egypt's pyramids. It could be a person, a painting, a dress, a pair of shoes, a watch, someone's makeup, potentially anything. No matter what we define as beautiful for ourselves as individuals, that appreciation begins really early in life. So there is a woman, a psychologist. She's a PhD, and her name is Judith Langlois, or it might be Langlois. I apologize if I'm not pronouncing that correctly. But she's a professor at the University of Texas. And she performed an experiment where she showed infants numerous pictures of people who were considered attractive and people who were considered potentially not so attractive. And as it turns out, in her experiment, she noted and observed that the infants looked much longer at the photos of the attractive people rather than at the photos of the unattractive people. And it didn't matter what the infants' mothers looked like, so it's not as if they had some programming because their mother or their father was attractive, had nothing to do with their parents. This is what the infants chose to look at, because somehow in their brains, looking at the attractive photos meant that it was something pleasing to their eyes. So what this experiment implies is that we all have an innate, given, pre-existing beauty sensor, if you will, or beauty detector. And that helps us from birth discern with whom we will be attracted or to whom we will mate throughout life. So it's there from the get-go. As a plastic surgeon, I'm guided by the basic tenets of form and function. The beauty ideal is that beauty is married to utility. One informs the other, and the picture or operation or the procedure is really only complete when the two are synergistically aligned. In the interest of aesthetics and looking good, obviously the part and the whole have to function. In the interest of restoring function and utility, ideally, it really ought to be aesthetically pleasing. So beauty factors in attraction, function, and utility, and beauty also heals. There was a study in the Scientific American about postoperative patients who were recovering from surgery. And the study looked at the patients who had a room with a view. They looked out onto a garden or a number of trees, something green, and they compared them to the patients who had a view of a brick wall. And as it turns out, those who had the room with the view, with the trees and with the garden, required less pain medication, had fewer complications, and recovered from surgery faster. So the beauty of an aesthetic environment, being surrounded by what you perceive to be beautiful, especially during times of stress, and surgery is stressful, that environment positively helps to heal. There's also truth in beauty. Beauty ain't no lie. Many people believe that facial features reveal a personality type, even if there's no scientific evidence for such a claim. So if you believe it, it's your truth, even though some may see that only as an opinion, but it's your truth. What is well known, and perhaps less arguable, is what the evolutionary psychologist put forth. Now, what's an evolutionary psychologist? Basically, an evolutionary psychologist uses an approach to understanding human behavior and mental processes. They basically focus on how evolution has shaped our mind and our behavior. And what the evolutionary psychologists say about beauty is that faces reflect fundamental characteristics that indicate a potential mate's state of health, genetics, and even character. According to one of my colleagues, Dr. Oz, he says about beauty, beauty is an instant message to others that transmits youth, fertility, and health. It's an extremely important evolutionary cue. So it seems as if Dr. Oz also agrees with the evolutionary psychologist, that we're not just using beauty to be pretty or attractive, but we're actually putting on our best faces, or putting forth our best faces so we can attract others in relationships, which can potentially be lifelong. So beauty is important for survival and the perpetuation of the genetic line. So far, beauty heals, and it serves as a window to the soul. Another face of beauty is that of disruptor. Now, how can beauty be disruptive? We're actually in an age where ugly is pretty, and jolie laide, or ugly pretty, is in fashion. So beauty can very much be a disruptor, even in fashion. Look at Jacquemus. Not that it's ugly, but look at Jacquemus. Things are deconstructed and taken apart, and yet when they come back together somehow, they're considered at least fashionable. and for some people, beautiful. There was a study of males, and basically it found that males tend to make worse decisions when they are faced with women of beauty. Now, is that disruptive or what? So that disruption tends to feed back to a part of the brain called the amygdala. And the amygdala detects value of social stimuli and the response of emotions. The amygdala, this part of the brain, is actually activated with men when they're in the face of someone attractive. And basically what happens is there's increased disregard for future rewards or what could potentially happen. It's like, oh my God, I am in the midst of beauty. I really don't care what happens anymore. That's kind of deep, isn't it? Could you imagine? I wonder if this is what one of my favorite authors, Fyodor Dostoevsky, meant when he said, beauty will save the world. What exactly does that mean? If there were more beautiful people in the Situation Room, would there be less war? This is not to say that there aren't beautiful people in the Situation Room, but I haven't been invited, so I wouldn't know. But it's an interesting question. Attractive faces also stimulated parts of the brain involved in processing rewards. So there are various parts of the brain that are involved in decision-making and the processing of social stimuli. And it's very interesting that those parts of the brain respond to and are activated in the face of beauty. The nucleus accumbens, that's based chiefly on two essential neurotransmitters or chemicals that speak to each other to cause our brains, and therefore us, to exhibit certain behaviors. And those two chemicals or neurotransmitters are called dopamine, and dopamine promotes pleasure and desire. And the second one is called serotonin. And those effects include satiety and inhibition. Now, if you put all of those together, satiety, inhibition, pleasure, desire, I mean, it kind of sounds like something really sexy. And that's definitely related to beauty. The other part of the brain that is stimulated by beauty is the medial prefrontal cortex, and that's involved in memory and decision-making. The anterior cingulate gyrus, or the anterior cingulate cortex, that shapes future behavior. And the orbitofrontal cortex in men only, because the orbito part has to do with vision. So in men only, when this is stimulated by beauty, that evaluates reward or evaluates the value of current behaviors. So all of this to say that the brain responds to beauty and lights up when the brain sees or perceives something, someone, an object, a person of beauty. Beauty has also been called our visual signature. Your face cosigns your mental state and your availability to interact with others. So what's your face saying about you today? What's your face saying about you when you wake up? What's your face saying about you in a mental situation? For whatever it's worth, for good or for bad, I totally wear my emotions on my face. I can't get away with anything. I think that's a good thing most of the time. So beauty has been called our beauty signature. I'd like to read to you an excerpt from one of my favorite books, and it's called The Survival of the Prettiest. And it's by a Dr. Nancy Etkoff, who is a PhD at Harvard Medical School. And she also has an MIT in brain and, she also has a degree from MIT in brain and cognitive sciences. So I think she pretty much knows what she's talking about. So Dr. Etkoff says, appearance is the most public part of the self. It is our sacrament, the visible self that the world assumes to be a mirror of the invisible inner self. This assumption may not be fair, and not how the best of all moral worlds would conduct itself, but that does not make it any less true. Beauty has consequences that we cannot erase by denial. Beauty will continue to operate outside jurisdiction in the lawless world of human attraction. Academics may ban it from intelligent discourse, and snobs may sniff that beauty is trivial and shallow, But in the real world, the beauty myth quickly collides with reality. There was another study in 2008 that examined women at a bar and compared women at the bar who wore makeup and women at the bar who did not wear makeup. And as it turns out, women at the bar who wore makeup were approached much more often than the women at the bar without makeup. Another study in 2010, granted a while ago, but still deeply relevant, asked people to rate people who slept well and those who were sleep deprived. And as you would imagine, the people who were sleep deprived were rated as less attractive. Yeah, I can't imagine that dark circles under eyes could ever be attractive, but sleep deprived patients or sleep deprived people were definitely rated as less attractive. What about RBF, resting face? Your thoughts definitely manifest on your face. There was another study in 2010 that basically found that a smile, even peripherally, even side-eye smile, a hint of a something sweet, was actually perceived as more attractive than a face with a neutral expression, not even RBF or resting face, neutral. So smile. To quote my colleague again, Dr. Oz, he says, "Beauty serves as the foundation for our feelings, our happiness, and our existence. In fact, beauty doesn't reflect our vanity as much as it does our humanity." I'm going to leave you with that thought, and I'd like to summarize as follows. Beauty is basic. It is complex. It is innate, necessary, a luxury, integral, fundamental, evolutionary, hard-wired, physical, spiritual, emotional, an experience, universal, art, truth. Its definition is so expansive and so deep that it really cannot be captured or contained. Like the essence of beauty itself, it escapes us even though we aspire to revel in it deeply and swim throughout it. There is science in beauty because beauty lies in truth, in the evident, in nature. Whether we intend to or not, the desire to be beautiful is undeniable. The pursuit of beauty, to embody it, to be surrounded by it, is fundamental to humanity and should not be perceived as frivolous or insignificant. To desire beauty is human, and it's necessary for our survival. All of that is really going to give me a lot to talk about at the next dinner party when someone actually says to me, "Oh, beauty, so superficial." I gotcha. Your beauty reflects your health. It serves us deeply, and it serves as an outward statement of how holistically well you are. Your outer appearance speaks volumes about the state of your inner health and also how you think, and vice versa. No one is immune unless you're not human. I'd like to end with another quote by Dr. Etkoff. The reason we have a universal passion for adornment, the reason that photos are doctored and painted representations idealized, is that we long to be not only works of nature, but works of art. We want to unite the three bodies into a unified whole. In part, the longing is spiritual, to have an outer representation that matches our dreams and visions and moral aspirations. It is also a quest for love and acceptance. Biologists would argue that at root, the quest for beauty is driven by the genes pressing to be passed on and making their current habitat as inviting for visitors as possible. In a world where we provide fake, vivid color airbrushing, and now digital alterations to pictures of everything imaginable. It hardly seems surprising that we want to doctor images of people. We attempt to make everything look better so as to please and to tempt. And we would be fools not to want to please and tempt one another. So what can you do to get or stay on this epic journey of beauty? This week's Fab 5 are my recommendations related to this podcast. Eat well, sleep well, think well, smile, and lastly, invest in yourself and invest in your beauty. Beautify yourself. Makeup, skincare, procedures, needles, knife, filler, Botox, whatever makes you happy. Do what it takes to feel empoweringly beautiful, because it's worth it, and so are you. One last quote, because I can't help myself. This is from a writer, and he is a writer and editor for the Association for Psychological Science, and I got this quote online. So here's the timeless message of psychological science. Be beautiful, or as beautiful as you can. Smile and sleep, and do whatever else you can do to make your face a reward. Among its other social benefits, attractiveness actually invites people to learn what you are made of. In other respects, more than just genetic fitness. According to a study at the University of British Columbia in 2010, attractive people are actually judged more accurately, at least closer to a subject's own self-assessments, than are the less attractive, because it draws others to go beyond the initial impressions. He quotes, "People do judge a book by its cover," the researchers write, "but a beautiful cover prompts a closer reading." How do you define your beauty? How may I help you to put your best face forward? What are you doing to share your beauty with the world to help make it a more beautiful place? Send me an email. Visit my website. Follow me on Facebook, Twitter, social media. Call me. Whatever you do, stay beautiful, inside and out. Thank you for listening to this week's Forever Fab podcast. Until next time, stay fabulous.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Forever Fab, the podcast on fashion, the art of living, and all things beauty, curated by Dr. Shirley Madeir, MD. Live beautifully and help make the world a more beautiful place.